I want to speak up on behalf of the drunken sailor, because drunken sailors, there's a limit to how much money a drunken sailor can spend. You asked him specifically, did he scrub his website? And he said, you can go to my website now and look at it. That's evasion. It's happening because of both the Republicans and the Democrats. It's their foolish economic policies. We need to cut taxes. We need to cut spending. We need to cut regulation. We are stealing from future generations. I'm in favor of a comprehensive overhaul of the entire immigration policy. We need to get back to civility. We shouldn't be calling each other names. Hey everybody, Marc Victor here. And I wanted to cut a short video just to explain some comments that I made during the debate, if you can call this a debate. As you know, this was more like sound bites. And sometimes it can be very difficult to explain a more nuanced or complex position on an issue when you got 45 seconds, if you even get that, during a debate. So I wanted to take this opportunity to more fully explain what I said, what I meant, why it makes sense, and or not. If it doesn't make sense, let me know. I remain open-minded to whatever your take is as well. But we were talking about the abortion question during the debate, and I was making the case that there are some questions that reasonable minds disagree on. Actually, there's many questions that reasonable minds disagree on. Abortion is one of those questions. The reason it's one of those questions is because the issue of when do we afford rights to an unborn baby doesn't have an objectively correct answer. We know when life begins at conception. That's a science question. But when we afford rights to an unborn baby, which is a different way to say that would be, when does the baby own itself? That's a different question. That's more of a policy question. And here, reasonable minds can disagree. Of course, we have groups who say the proper time to afford rights to the unborn baby is the moment of conception, right when you have the initial 2 cells. Other people say, no, 15 weeks seems to be the right place. There's some legislation now that suggests 15 weeks should be the point. Other people say, no, viability, which is the point at which we can keep, with our present science and technology, the unborn baby alive outside the womb. And yet still other people use a point far down the road, even as late as the moment of birth. I don't think that's reasonable. But there are places in there that reasonable minds can disagree. And so when we get a situation like that, I don't think a one-size-fits-all solution makes sense, because we're going to be fighting about it forever. And during the debate, I made a point that these types of decisions should be made in the smallest community possible. Mesa should pass a law that the people in Mesa like, and the people in Tempe should pass a law that the people in Tempe like. The people in the local jurisdictions, for example, here in Arizona, the people in Mesa, very many of them feel that the pro-life position makes sense, and therefore rights should be afforded at the moment of conception. Other places, maybe Tempe, might feel differently about that and say, no, that's too soon to afford rights. It should be a later point. The reason I like the local small community decisions, because this puts market forces on the question, right? If people are really upset with the position that I expect Mesa would take, they could refuse to do business there, not work there, not live there, move from there, whatever. They could boycott businesses in Mesa if they want, or Tempe if they don't like Tempe's rule. This gets market forces on the question. I don't think we're going to get 500 different rules here. What I think is we'll generally settle on the most reasonable selections. Also, the choices that should be up for a vote are only within a reasonable range of choices. And so I likened this question to many other questions. One of them is, who should be representing the people of Arizona in the Senate? Okay, that's the kind of question that should be up for a vote. One of the other things that I didn't mention during the debate was the question of what exactly is a substantial risk. As you know, the live and let live position is that if somebody creates a substantial risk of harm to another person, then they violate the legal principle, and that conduct should be prohibited. But what exactly is a substantial risk? Okay, reasonable minds disagree on this point. That's exactly the kind of a question that should be in the smallest jurisdiction possible. Well, I threw out in a second or two that I had had to discuss it, the age of consent being one of those questions, right? What should the age of consent be? This is something that reasonable minds disagree on. That should be up for a vote. Now, this is blown up on social media. Oh, Mark, doesn't think that we should have an age of consent or something like that. Who knows? That wasn't what I was suggesting at all. What I was suggesting is that reasonable minds disagree on what is the proper age of consent. Take alcohol, for example. The current law in Arizona is 21 years old to legally buy alcohol. Reasonable minds disagree. There's no right answer. Should it be 21? Should it be 22? Should it be 20, 19, 18, 17? I don't know. But there's a reasonable range there, right? Obviously, 10 years old isn't a reasonable choice. 25 years old isn't a reasonable choice. So we do need to figure out what is a reasonable range. That's step one. What are the reasonable range of available choices? And then once we got that figured out, step two, let's vote on that and let the people in the local community make that decision. Okay, so age of consent for purposes of buying alcohol is one question. Age of consent for entering into various legally enforceable contracts, that's another question. Right now it's 18. Should it be 19? Should it be 17? I don't know. That's the kind of thing that maybe people in the local community should decide on. Of course, having sex is also one of those questions. There's no objectively right answer as to what is the proper age that people should be allowed to legally have sex. But there's a reasonable range of choices there, right? 18 is the age right now. Could it be 19? Could it be 17? I don't take a position on that. There's definitely ages below 17 that are unreasonable. I am not suggesting that at all. What I am suggesting is that we should first establish a reasonable range. I think 17, 18, 19, all that makes sense. There might be places that say, you know what, 20 makes sense. I don't know. Reasonable minds disagree on this question, and there's no objectively right answer. When we reach a question like that, we don't need a one-size-fits-all solution. Let the people in that local community, based on their customs and traditions and what's normal in their community, let's let them decide what makes sense. Okay, so I am not suggesting that we should lower the age much lower than 18, or I don't know I would even take a position that it should be lower than 18. But if a community thinks it should be 17, fine. If they think it should be much lower than that, I would say that's an unreasonable construction and they shouldn't get to make that choice. This makes sense for lots of reasons. It gets us past these difficult issues where reasonable minds disagree. Okay, whether you agree or not, happy to hear from you at all times. It's my solution on how best to get past questions where reasonable minds, not unreasonable minds, where reasonable minds disagree. Thank you.